What if I told you that one man escaped prison? Not once, not twice, but 4 times. And each time, the authorities were left scratching their heads, wondering how he pulled it off. No breaking through walls, no high-speed getaways, just pure, quiet genius. It was as if Houdini had been reborn, only this time, with a taste for fraud and a devilish grin. His name? Stephen Russell. But by the end of this story, you might know him better as the man who fooled an entire justice system, again and again. Our story begins in the early 1990s, when Stephen Russell was still just another face in the crowd. An ordinary man with no criminal record, he worked as an accountant, paid his taxes, and went home to a quiet life. There was no sign that a storm was brewing, until one cold, calculated decision shattered everything. His manager fired him without warning, without cause. Stephen had poured himself into his work. To be discarded like that was more than a blow. It was betrayal. That betrayal was the spark. Something in Stephen snapped. What followed was less a descent into crime and more a transformation. He was done playing by the rules of a system that had failed him, and the system had no idea what it had just created. Stephen didn't rush into chaos. No, he was too smart for that. He studied people, he listened, he watched, and then he started small, scamming insurance companies with staged accidents, the kind that looked just real enough to raise a claim, but not enough to raise suspicion. At least, not at first. But eventually, even the sharpest tricks slip. In 1992, Stephen was caught and handed a 6-month sentence. For most, that would be the end of the story. Serve your time, think about your mistakes, get out. But Stephen, he had no plans of sticking around that long. Inside that Texas jail, he wasn't just another inmate. He was a student of the system, observing, absorbing, waiting. What he saw was opportunity. Workers came in and out of the prison dressed in regular clothes, with radios clipped to their belts. They weren't guards. They weren't inmates. They were the invisible hands keeping the place running. Plumbers, maintenance techs, inspectors, and they left through the same doors they entered, without resistance. Stephen's plan was simple, and that's what made it genius. He managed to get his hands on a set of civilian clothes and a radio. Then, one day, just a month after arriving, he slipped into costume, walked up to the guard's window, nodded like he'd done it 100 times, and walked right out. No alarms, no sirens, just a calm, deliberate exit. And just like that, Stephen Russell was free. He vanished into Florida under a new name, laying low for 2 years. But the quiet life didn't stick. He couldn't help himself. He attempted another con, this time forging insurance checks. That's when the law caught up with him again. Dragged back to Houston, he faced the weight of his past. For a brief moment, he decided to give up the fight and serve his sentence. But people like Stephen don't just stop dreaming. He left prison with a new plan, a bigger one. No more petty scams, no more staged accidents. He was going to go corporate. Stephen spotted an ad in the paper for a financial manager position at one of the most prestigious health insurance companies in the country. There was just one problem. He had none of the qualifications, no experience, no degrees, no background in finance. But when did reality ever stop Stephen? He fabricated an entire resume, degrees from Ivy League schools, jobs at firms that didn't exist, glowing references, all fake. But he didn't stop there. Stephen knew he had to sound like he belonged, so he immersed himself in the Wall Street Journal. He studied financial textbooks, absorbed the jargon, and memorized the movements of the market. When he sat down for that interview, he wasn't an imposter. He was the expert. His charm, poise, and encyclopedic knowledge wowed the panel. When they called his references, the numbers led straight back to Stephen, playing different voices, different personalities. One call praised his unmatched strategic mind. Another described him as the single best asset their company had ever hired. The hooks were in deep, and they bit. Soon, Stephen was handling large transactions, moving money, building trust, until one day he made a mistake. A bank employee reviewing a refinance request noticed something strange. Large sums of money were flowing through Stephen's personal accounts, suspiciously large. And when they traced the source, it led straight back to the insurance company. The CEO got the call. So did the DA's office. But Stephen was already moving. Before the trap could close, he tried to drain his accounts, managing to withdraw $40,000 from a series of ATMs. He was nearly gone when he made a critical misstep. He returned home to retrieve valuables. The police were already there. Arrested again. His bail? A nearly impossible $950,000. But remember, Stephen never saw prison walls as permanent, just puzzles to be solved. This time, he picked up the phone and called the Harris County Records Office. Pretending to be the very judge who had sentenced him, he calmly told the clerk that Stephen Russell's bail had been dramatically reduced to just $45,000 after a private appellate session. He knew the right words, the legal jargon, the name of the case, even the courtroom number. The clerk, understandably overwhelmed by the formality and confidence, made the change. Then, Stephen contacted a bail financing company. He convinced them, somehow, miraculously, to post the $45,000. They agreed. He walked out. Freedom. Again. For 5 days, he vanished into Florida, hiding out in beachfront hotels. But the police were listening in. His calls were monitored. He was tracked, located, and, just like before, captured. This time, the sentence hit harder. 40 years. A clear message from the state. Enough was enough. But Stephen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. This time, they sent him to a maximum security facility. No more games, they thought. No more radios or outfits. He was watched day and night. But they underestimated just how creative desperation can become when genius is involved. Within weeks, Stephen noticed the medical wing of the prison. The doctors and nurses all wore green or blue scrubs. Different from guards, easy to replicate. He managed to dye his clothes to match. On Friday, December 13th, he slipped them on under his prison uniform, ate breakfast early, then discarded his white gear in a hidden corner. He walked toward the guard's booth like a man on a mission. The female officer, distracted by a personal phone call, as she always was at that hour, glanced up only long enough to see a man in scrubs wave politely. The door buzzed open. Stephen walked through. Then he walked out. He needed to get far, fast. He knocked on a nearby door, telling the man inside he was a doctor who had crashed his car after a night of drinking and needed a ride. The stranger obliged, driving him to the next town where Stephen hopped into a cab. This time, he claimed to be a surgeon needed urgently at Houston's medical center. The driver raced him across town. When they arrived, Stephen smiled, said he'd go inside to get the fare from his locker, and vanished again. It was his third escape. And now the Texas Department of Corrections was not just embarrassed. They were furious. Enter Terry Capps, leader of the Special Operations Unit, a hunter, a man with a mission. He assembled a team for one job: bring Stephen Russell back. For good. And while they chased shadows across Texas, Stephen was already gone. He had left the state and headed east, to Biloxi, Mississippi. He needed cash, and what better way than gambling? But luck has its limits. Eventually, a sharp-eyed marshal in Biloxi recognized him from a photo. By pure coincidence, or fate, he spotted Stephen on the street and made the arrest. Stephen was dragged back to Texas. This time, they tacked on 5 more years. 45 in total. No parole for at least 11. But if you think that's the end of Stephen Russell's story, then you've clearly forgotten who we're dealing with. Because even behind concrete walls and iron bars, Stephen's mind never stopped moving. They thought they had him this time. After 3 escapes and an endless string of frauds, Stephen Russell was finally where they believed he belonged. Buried in a maximum security prison, locked away like a ghost in a cell. No more disguises, no more smooth-talking phone calls, no more tricks. For most inmates, that would be the end of the line. But Stephen? He was just getting started. The world may have seen him as a fraudster, a liar, a manipulator, but inside that mind was something else. A machine that never stopped running. While guards were lulled into routine, Stephen was studying. And what he noticed this time would push the limits of even his wild imagination. There was a medical unit inside the prison. Doctors, nurses, specialists came and went, but more importantly, they wore uniforms, soft green and blue scrubs. They weren't searched. They weren't questioned. They walked out of the prison every day unnoticed. And that, Stephen realized, was the crack in the wall. But this time, there would be no easy costumes or radios smuggled in. The scrutiny around him was suffocating. He had to play the long game. And so began his most bizarre escape plan yet. It didn't start with forged papers or a fake identity. It started with weight loss. Stephen began starving himself. Day after day, week after week. He made himself vomit. He forced symptoms. He studied every detail of AIDS, its signs, its progression, its effects on the body. And then he did something that shocked even the prison staff. He faked the disease. He bribed a medical staffer to falsify test results. HIV positive, declining fast. He limped. He coughed. He whispered in raspy tones. He asked for help, not freedom, just dignity in his final days. The staff didn't question him. Why would they? The paperwork was there. The weight was falling off his bones. His skin was pale. His eyes sunken. 8 months passed. He lay motionless in the infirmary, pretending to be bedridden and near death. The plan was unfolding perfectly. But there was one more layer of deception, one final twist of the knife. He began collecting sedatives, stashing them over time. Then, when the moment was right, he swallowed a massive dose. Stephen Russell slipped into a coma. 4 days later, he was still unconscious. The doctors were sure he had only weeks to live. And just like that, the doors opened. They granted him parole. No one fights to keep a dying man in chains. They transferred him to a hospice in Kennedy, Texas, to live out what they thought were his last few days. But Stephen was 3 steps ahead. While he lay in his hospital bed, he called the prison authorities, this time as Dr. Adam Ruiz, a made-up infectious disease specialist. He told them he was running a trial, an experimental AIDS treatment. He needed patients with advanced symptoms. Stephen Russell fit the bill. The transfer was arranged. And then, in a move so outrageous, it sounds like a movie script, Stephen forged his own death certificate, signed by Dr. Ruiz. Cause of death: complications from AIDS. He mailed it to the prison, to the parole board, to the hospice. Stephen Russell was now legally dead, but he was very much alive. No one was looking for him. No alarms were raised. He slipped into the world like a ghost. Free again. 4 times now. 4 escapes, each more unbelievable than the last. And this time, he could have disappeared forever. But that wasn't Stephen. Instead of lying low, he leaned back into the one thing he couldn't resist: deception. He needed a new identity, so he walked into a local print shop and ordered a lawyer's ID. The shop owner, skeptical, handed over the card, but quietly alerted the authorities. A photo of the card made its way to the Houston Police Department. When a seasoned officer saw it, he paused. He knew that face. It was supposed to be a dead man's face. He called the one person who needed to know: Terry Capps. Terry's blood ran cold. He had been sure Stephen was gone. The reports were all there. The certificate, the records, the confirmation. But now it was obvious. Stephen had pulled it off again, faked his death, escaped the system one more time. Terry wasted no time. He assembled a new task force. Houston, Dallas, Mississippi. It didn't matter. They were going to find him and stop him, for good this time. Just a few weeks after his death, Stephen walked into a bank in Dallas, posing as a wealthy investor. He requested a $75,000 loan. The bank's vice president grew suspicious and asked him to wait. Stephen sensed it immediately. He faked a stroke, collapsed in the bank. An ambulance rushed him to the hospital. But he didn't panic. He planned. From his hospital bed, he called the front desk, pretending to be an FBI agent, told them the man under guard in room 304 was no longer under investigation and was cleared to be released immediately. And they believed him. Again. By the time the real FBI arrived, Stephen was gone. All that remained was a driver's license and a faint trail of movement. Terry and his team were furious. They began combing through hotel bookings, medical bills, anything that might reveal his location. Days turned into nights. Then, a break. An insurance company reported receiving strange, suspicious documents by fax. Documents traced back to a local machine in Dallas. Terry set up an ambush at the location. But fate stepped in once more. 2 detectives spotted a man walking casually down the street. They recognized him instantly from the circulated photo. Stephen Russell. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He simply gave a slight, almost amused smile. Caught. For the 4th time. But this time, there would be no leniency, no short sentences, no parole. Stephen was hit with 144 years in prison. Locked inside the most secure unit Texas had to offer. A place designed for the worst of the worst. Violent criminals, killers, men who saw daylight for only 1 hour each day. Chained, guarded, isolated. And there, deep in the concrete heart of the prison system, is where Stephen Russell has remained since 1998. You'd think that would be the end. But then again, you thought that after the first escape, and the second, and the third, Stephen taught the world a terrifying truth. That if you combine charm, intelligence, and audacity, you can make the impossible seem effortless. That a man with no weapon, no violence, and no army can still break through the strongest prison walls using nothing but words and wit. But maybe the most chilling part of Stephen's story isn't how he escaped. It's how long he stayed one step ahead of everyone else. And if you're wondering whether he's given up trying, Well, that's a question only time and Stephen can answer. Because every lock has a key, and Stephen Russell always finds it. If this story left you speechless, now imagine what else they're hiding in the prison files. Like this next story, about a man who lived inside a vault for 27 hours, outsmarted motion sensors, and stole $20 million in front of everyone's eyes. Subscribe now and hit the bell. You don't want to miss what comes next.